My friends, it is I, and today I crawl out of my hole to review The Legend of Korra, which to be honest is odd. Partially because I've yet to make a video of this style, but mostly because it's difficult to get a good grasp of where the community stands with regards to Korra. As far as most critics go, it falls just behind Avatar, being a respectable, if ultimately inferior, sequel. In that sense, it's like The Dark Knight Rises. It's brilliant, but it's not The Dark Knight. It will never be The Dark Knight, and that's okay. Beyond the critics, the fanbase also seems to enjoy Korra and have reached a similar conclusion. It's great, but not quite as great as Avatar. So if everyone likes Korra, then why is this video a defense of it? Well, because I've only just given you half the story. Being as popular as Korra is, it's bound to have its fair share of dissenters. But unlike other popular shows, Korra is unique in that its naysayers, at times, seem to be in the majority rather than the minority. You have absolute gems of quality YouTube content like The Legend of Korra is Garbage and Here's Why by Lily Orchard with 5 million views. And who could forget The Legend of Korra by ER? And these videos seem to be respected, positively received, and even loved among viewers. Now, I believe the reason for this is simple. Lily Orchard deletes negative comments, and ER's fanbase is a bunch of idiots. Okay, but in all seriousness, clearly there is a strong argument against Korra. And where there is an argument, there is a counter-argument. That is my purpose today, folks. I am the counter-argument. Today I'm going to go through, review, and defend The Legend of Korra. Season 1, because I don't want this video to be 6 hours long. I'll do the same for the other 3 seasons, it's just gonna take me a bit longer, so I guess you could call this Part 1. Oh, and before we start, obviously major spoilers for Season 1, and possibly further. And you should really just watch Korra yourself before watching this video. If you haven't seen it, you'll probably be confused. So if you need to, just watch it yourself and then come back. This video isn't going anywhere, I promise I'll still be here when you're done.
Round 1.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
What is perhaps Korra's most controversial scene just so happens to be our introduction to the series. And as you can imagine, it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. There are 2 common arguments regarding this scene. The first is that this scene, which shows Korra bending 3 of the 4 elements at an extremely young age, I think she's supposed to be 4 or 5, maybe 6? Portrays Korra as a Mary Sue, simply overpowered and perfect in every way. This argument was popularized by everyone's favorite, most respected member of the— couldn't say it with a straight face. It's ER. ER popularized the argument. The second argument is an extension of the first. It's the claim that Korra, being a Mary Sue and being able to bend these 3 elements, completely undermines the entirety of Avatar, as Aang learning the elements was the driving force of the original show's plot. Now, these arguments actually make perfect sense. You know, if you choose to ignore the entirety of the original show. Like the fact that Aang was able to waterbend on his first attempt, and firebend on his first attempt, can't forget that, and while it's not explicitly stated, it's heavily implied that he was a prodigy in airbending as well, having his mastery tattoos at the young age of 12 and being generally ahead of his peers. So he probably did that on his first attempt too. The only elements Aang really struggled with was Earth, and he figured that out in literally a day. Compare that to Korra, who, while being able to bend 3 of the 4 elements at an extremely young age, took over a decade in a compound to master those 3 elements. Yeah, and she's the Mary Sue. Okay, sir, you have a good night. But that's one scene, a first impression. We still have to get through the entire rest of the season.
Round 2!
After Child Korra scares away half the fanbase, the show skips ahead to Teen Korra, who's just mastered her 3rd and seemingly preferred element, fire. And this is where it becomes readily apparent just what kind of show we're watching. This is when the viewer realizes that they are no longer watching Avatar. See, Avatar took its sweet time with everything it did, whereas The Legend of Korra seems to be on a time crunch. It's impatient and in a hurry to get to the meat of its story. So it makes sense that the main character and focus of this episode, Korra, is an impatient, almost childish Avatar who wants to get to the meat of her story as fast as possible. She spent years training under the watchful eye of the White Lotus and under the guidance of Katara, now an old woman seemingly in charge of Korra's training, which makes sense given that she mentored Aang back when he was learning waterbending. I've heard the argument that Katara would never go along with Korra learning the elements while kept hidden in the safety of the South Pole, with the basis of this argument being that Katara traveled the world and therefore would want the same for Korra. And this makes absolutely no sense. Katara traveled to the Northern Water Tribe specifically because she was denied a waterbending teacher her whole life, being the
only waterbender in the whole South Pole.
And even then, when given the opportunity to travel to the North Pole with Aang, she chose not to because she didn't want to leave her family. And even after Aang gave himself up to save her village, she only made the final decision to leave and travel with him when Sokka, her brother and half her remaining family, pushed her along, practically making the decision for her.
Are you gonna talk all day, or are you coming with me?
This, coupled with the fact that Katara's always assumed a parental role in Team Avatar, almost to the point of being a control freak, is not only consistent with, but outright supports the idea that she would be okay with, and even supportive of Korra learning the elements in the comfort and safety of the South Pole, until Korra decides she wants to leave, which Katara has no qualms with, which is also consistent with her idolization of Gran Gran, who gave her the same treatment when she wanted to leave. Yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this argument is completely idiotic, and anyone who would make it while watching Korra invariably must be mentally disabled. So, when Aang's son and the only living airbending master, Tenzin, shows up to tell Korra that instead of moving to the South Pole to teach her airbending, he's only visiting and must return to Republic City, Korra decides, fuck it, I'm coming with. Tenzin and the White Lotus tell her, no, that's a terrible idea, and that she should stay there in the South Pole. So after Tenzin leaves for Republic City, Korra again decides, fuck it, I'm coming with, and stows away on a ship headed for the city. Upon arrival, she tries to buy food, but forgets that she needs money to do that because she's been pampered her whole life. So she goes fishing instead, and meets a nice homeless guy, who informs her that Republic City actually has quite a sizable homeless population. She then encounters a protester, preaching about bringing down the current oppression of non-benders in Republic City. And this is as good a place as any to bring up the biggest argument against the Legend of Korra's writing. Everyone brings this up. Lily Orchard, ER, even MrEnter makes this argument.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel! That makes me feel angry!
This protester is promoting Amon, the leader and symbol of the Equalists, the organization that's most fed up with the status quo. Basically, the argument here is that Amon's revolution is based on the oppression of non-benders, and that within the text of the show, no such oppression takes place. This makes absolutely no sense. Okay, let's start with the obvious example. Pro Bending, the series' stand-in for boxing or wrestling or really any combat-based entertainment, is surprisingly exclusive to benders. Now real quick, I'd like to explain something. Bending is not a martial art. It's not a skill that you can just pick up and learn in this universe. It's a gift. Some people can do it, some people can't. And this gift is hereditary. For all intents and purposes, it is genetic. Let that sink in. Bending is genetic. It may as well be an identifier of race. Now imagine for a moment if only white people could box. That's basically pro-bending. But that's the easy example. Let's dig a little deeper. Seemingly the entire police force of Republic City is made up of metal benders, after Toph, the first police chief. Now imagine if only one ethnicity could become a cop, and that ethnicity was central to the branding and identity of your city's police force. You would be understandably confused and concerned. But again, this is an obvious example, and I'm honestly shocked that no one thought of this before claiming that we don't see any examples of non-bender oppression, but hey, what do I know? Instead of these glaring examples, let's look at the more subtle details. Let's look at the economy as a whole. Like, why the fuck would anyone but an earthbender be hired for a construction job? You think that giant statue of Aang was built by non-benders? No, of course not. It was probably made by Toph because she was bored. Why would you hire anyone but an earthbender for a construction job? They can manipulate metal at their fingertips.
It should look like this, but instead it looks like this.
Who Who would do a thing like that?
Who could do a thing like that? And by that, I mean this.
But I suppose the show don't tell argument actually holds some weight here. After all, we don't actually see any jobs that rely on bending in Season 1 of Korra. Oh damn, lightning bending is used to generate power. Because of fucking course it is. And oh look, the job pays really well. Because of fucking course it does. Do I seem riled up? That's because I am. Why does everyone jump on the show don't tell argument? It doesn't apply here. You have to ignore so much for it to even come close to working. Like, if it was only ER, that'd be fine. It's ER, what did you expect? Even Lily Orchard arguing this isn't that surprising. Her video as a whole didn't make a lot of sense. But even MrEnter jumped on this, man. Why? Why this? Why is this the conclusion that everyone seems to be coming to? It's not the case. Anyway, Korra almost knocks the protester off his podium, finds some gangsters robbing a shopkeeper, tears up a street fighting them, and gets arrested. But is bailed out by Tenzin, because Tenzin is ya boy. Tenzin tries to send Korra home, but after passing a high-level speech check, Korra convinces him that, hey, maybe locking the Avatar away from normal society isn't such a great idea after all. And I guess the White Lotus members ready to take her home just get the day off or something. A press conference is held, confirming that the Avatar is here to stay. Now, I've heard the argument that it makes no sense for Korra to expose the fact that she's in Republic City, but she kinda did that the moment she arrived, and is the Avatar, so I don't think I need to explain why that argument makes no sense.
Don't forget, he called ye yellow. Don't forget, he called you pink.
Korra's airbending training begins, with Tenzin trying to teach her to less than ideal results. Tenzin doesn't quite know how to get through to Korra. He tells her what she needs to do.
The key is to be like the leaf.
But when Korra inevitably fails, the best he can offer is
Patience, Korra!
Which is the airbending equivalent of saying try harder, and as anyone who's ever tried to do anything can tell you, that advice means nothing. Now, this isn't a critique of Tenzin's character. He's never had to teach someone with this much of a block for airbending before. It's similar to Toph trying to teach Aang. When he ran into problems trying to bend Earth, the best Toph had to offer was repeating the instructions and expecting him to get it. Not everyone is cut out for teaching, and that's okay. On the side, Korra really wants to watch a pro bending match, which is basically 3v3 boxing, but Tenzin thinks it's a waste of time and Korra shouldn't be exposed to that mockery of bending. So he tells her to remain on the island, and she reluctantly agrees. However, when her frustration over her lack of progress grows, she decides, fuck it, I'ma swim to a pro bending match, and meets Bolin, who takes her to the arena to watch his match, seemingly wanting to get in her pants, leading her to meet Mako, who wants nothing to do with her pants.
For now.
The match begins, and Mako and Bolin showcase their incredible bending talent, with their teammate Hasuk lagging behind, seemingly doing more harm than good, but thanks to Mako, they narrowly win the match, taking one more step towards the championship tournament. Mako chastises Hasuk for being a detriment to the team, and we never hear from him again. Hasuk walks off salty, and for all intents and purposes, him leaving this room is him leaving the entire show. This was my first real test as a reviewer. I love The Legend of Korra, but this is something you just can't ignore. Hasuk is a blatant plot device. He fills the empty spot on Mako and Bolin's team, so he can ditch, so Korra can take his place. That is the only purpose he serves. He is literally Korra's placeholder. Here's a question. What does Hasuk want? It's later revealed that Mako and Bolin grew up on the streets and they pro-bend to pay the bills. What about Hasuk? Is he actually rich and only pro-bends for the fun of it? Is that why he doesn't mind walking away? Do the championship winnings mean nothing to him? Or maybe he also grew up on the streets, but him and Mako legitimately just despise each other so much to the point where his ego prevents him from continuing to work with his team. Maybe they actually got along famously and the Equalists kidnapped him. Maybe just a whole lot of maybes. But no, it's none of these. He literally just doesn't show up again. He's not a character. He's a plot device to get Korra to join the Fire Ferrets. Except it's not even really that. There is a little bit of character here, and it contradicts his purpose in the plot. Hasuk cheers. He visibly cheers after his team wins the round we see him in. So he clearly enjoys pro bending. He's not dragging his feet or anything. He's having fun. He likes it here. So it makes even less sense when he decides, fuck it, I'ma head out, and is never seen again. It feels like they were halfway through writing his character, but stopped once they had enough to keep the plot going. Anyway, as stated, Hasuk vanishes off the face of the earth, but before that, Korra asks Bolin to show her some pro-bending moves, and reveals that she's the Avatar. We get a brief punchline from Mako, and Bolin helps Korra more than he expected to, giving context to her airbending training. Basically, Korra's training arc this episode goes a little something like this.
Dodge! Dodge!
Okay, Korra, here's a thought, and this is just a suggestion. How about staying light on your feet so you're ready to dodge? Holy shit! I never thought of that!
Dodge!
Hold the phone. Stop the presses. She's still in the game, folks, and she's moving like an entirely different player.
So Korra permanently joins the Fire Ferrets, makes some progress in her training, and Tenzin dislodges that stick from his rectum. What a wholesome story. You know, except for Hasuk, but I'm sure things can only get better from here.
We can rebuild it. Better, faster, stronger.
So the Fire Ferrets need to pay some sweet, sweet cash to compete in the tournament. Normally, the winnings from the matches they've won would cover it, but they're in crippling debt. So the fact that Mako and Bolin grew up on the street actually drives the plot, and Bolin turns to an old gangster he and his brother used to work with, while Mako starts making bank at the power plant. Mako comes home after a hard day's night, only to discover that Bolin is nowhere to be seen. He checks to see if Korra knows where he is, and she doesn't. Mako is about to leave, but Korra convinces him that with the help of her pet, Naga, and her amazing tracking abilities, she can be useful in finding Bolin. Naga does no such tracking this episode. Mako gets a lead on Bolin by checking his usual hangout, and Korra gets another lead later by interrogating that Equalist protester from earlier. Naga does literally nothing. I would compare Naga to Hasuk in that she's a plot device to get Korra and Mako together to find Bolin, but unlike Hasuk, I can actually confidently say that Naga gets better as the season progresses. I promise, guys, it does get better. Naga and Hasuk are the exceptions, not the rule. So after some romance fodder, they discover that Bolin's been taken by the leader of the Equalists, Amon, and that he has the power to take away someone's bending.
Permanently.
Amon is an amazing antagonist. Steve Blum dominates every scene he's in, and it obviously couldn't have been easy having to fill the shoes of Mark Hamill's Ozai. But Steve kills it, and that's to say nothing of the aura of pure menace the animation manages to convey. And while you can't not love ya boy the Lieutenant with his bad guy mustache, undying loyalty, and similarly phenomenal voice work, this time by Lance Henriksen, a lot of people simply write him off due to Amon completely stealing the show. I know I did on my first watch through. So Mako and Korra managed to just barely escape with Bolin, but not before Amon traumatizes Korra by existing, leaving her with a crippling fear of losing her bending, which brings us to one of my favorite episodes. The episode starts with Korra having a nightmare about Amon taking her bending, an understandable fear when you consider that her entire life thus far has revolved around being the Avatar.
After I take your bending away, you will be nothing.
Meanwhile, the city council is trying to determine the best approach to deal with the threat Amon poses. And this is where we're introduced to probably the best character in the season, Tarlock. Tarlock wants to form a task force with the sole purpose of battling Amon and the Equalists. He, of course, intends to lead this task force. Tenzin argues that a move like this would be counterproductive, only further dividing benders and non-benders. Basically, Tenzin's arguing that when you respond to protests against oppression with brute force, you'll just galvanize the protesters into taking more drastic action, escalating the situation. Not that that's at all relevant right now. Real-world parallels aside, Tarlock sways the other council members and gets his task force. Now he sets his sights on Korra, knowing that having the Avatar on his task force would not only be the best possible PR, but also an immense tactical advantage in the field. So, Tarlock drops by Tenzin's home unannounced, and Tenzin is understandably upset.
This is my home, Tarlock. We're about to eat dinner.
But Tarlock weasels his way through with,
"Good, because I am absolutely famished. Airbenders never turn away a hungry guest, am I right?"
I love this interaction. It communicates three things. 1, Tenzin's pressure to hold up the traditions of the air nomads. 2, that Tarlock is aware of this weakness. And 3, he is more than willing to take advantage of said weakness. Afterwards, Tenzin's daughter assaults Tarlock with a barrage of questions, to which he replies, remaining as polite as possible, being Tenzin's guest.
Well, aren't you precocious?
Tarlock immediately locks onto Korra, at first using flattery to butter her up.
Infiltrating Amon's rally. Now, that took some real initiative.
And it starts to work.
I think you're the first authority figure in the city who's happy I'm here.
Tarlock continues this flattery, but Tenzin interjects, cutting to the chase and asking what he wants from Korra. But Tarlock again turns Tenzin's heritage and philosophy against him, telling him to have patience, a lesson he's tirelessly trying to teach Korra. Tarlock does cut to the chase, however, and offers Korra a position on his task force. But Korra refuses, seemingly out of fear of any position that could place her near Amon. Tarlock is surprised, but maintains his composure and exits, assuring Korra that she'll be hearing from him soon. Holy shit, what a scene. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, at least for a while. While Korra struggles with her fears and Tarlock goes away to scheme, Mako gets hit by a car and fucking dies. Okay, it wasn't a car, it was a moped, and he didn't die, he's just fine in fact, and he's going on a date with his assailant, Asami. The date goes well, turns out she's rich, and he gets to meet the inventor of the thing that almost murdered him to death. Asami's father and head of Future Industries, Hiroshi Sato, is made aware of Mako's financial troubles and sees a little of himself in the young fire ferret, having been denied his opportunity until a similarly wealthy fellow helped him realize his dream. So he sponsors Mako's team, giving them the money they need to compete in the tournament, so long as they shill for his brand, but Mako seems to have no issue there. Asami's introduction to the show is more than a little sloppy. She literally crashes into the script without any warning. Apparently, she's a huge fan of pro bending and has been following Mako's career, so it would have made a lot more sense for them to have met after a match. Maybe she wants an autograph. But having their meeting be a freak accident makes it feel like the only reason she's here is because the plot needs to introduce Hiroshi to get Mako some cash. It's not terrible, but when placed next to the most well-written scene thus far, its shortcomings are a bit more noticeable. Speaking of great writing, it's time to return to the A-plot, and it doesn't skip a beat. Tarlock sends Korra an invitation to a party in her honor after multiple gifts fail to convince her to join his task force. Korra attends, and Tarlock meets her almost immediately, waving over and introducing her to Hiroshi, who tells her the city expects great things from her. Korra responds with little enthusiasm, but remains composed. Tarlock then waves over Chief Beifong, who knows and tells Korra that she's done nothing to deserve the party she's attending. This hits a lot harder for Korra, and Tarlock is smiling all the while. Flattery failed, so he shifted to guilt, using Beifong as his weapon, which leads us to a surprise press conference he seems to have set up. Korra is bombarded with questions, all leading back to the subject of joining Tarlock's task force. When the idea that Korra is afraid of Amon comes up, she caves and announces that she will be joining this task force, with Tarlock stepping in and ending the conference then and there. Korra, Tarlock, and the rest of his task force then raid an Equalist hideout, and it's a smashing success, with Tarlock telling Korra they make a good team, and her agreeing. Now that she's joined Tarlock, things are finally looking up. This new progress and positive reinforcement pushes Korra to challenge Amon to a duel. Now, I've heard the argument that this undermines the fact that Amon scares Korra, so I'm gonna provide an analogy. I'm terrified of spiders. I see a spider and I freeze the fuck up. Now, once I cease to be a bitch and find the willpower to actually move, do I sprint in the other direction? No. I grab the nearest collection of blunt objects and start throwing. Or if there's a can of Raid nearby, start spraying. It's a completely valid response to a fear to want to face it head on. This is also in line with Korra's character, having now been exposed to battling with Equalists and succeeding. She's gained confidence that they're not this unstoppable force. Basically, ER is a hack. Korra waits for Amon until she's tired and convinced he's a no-show. Then, surprise, she's ambushed and captured. But Amon lets her go, explaining that taking her bending now would only make her a martyr. So he makes the promise to destroy her when the time for their duel does come. and knocks her out. This triggers the first of multiple visions for Korra, keeping in line with the theme of Korra being the opposite of Aang. Instead of being confronted by multiple spirits and led to her past life, she's treated to a few vague visions. It's a much more grounded take on the concept of past lives from Avatar, and personally I think it works here. It implies that Aang was an anomaly and that he was already a deeply spiritual person, so that side of being the Avatar came easy to him, and there's no information in the previous series to contradict this. But back to Korra, the scene is haunting, and Amon leaves as quickly as he appeared. Now Korra is more scared than ever and has no idea what to do regarding the Equalists. What an episode. It leaves you on the edge of your seat, waiting to see how the show will follow up such a tense story. I can't wait to see how they'll top themselves next episode.
Love is in the air.
Oh, god damn it.
Congratulations on the mess you made of things.
This episode is bad, especially when compared to the best episode thus far, which comes just before it. After last episode, every little problem in this one just jumps out at you. It's really jarring. Problem 1, pacing. We just got done with one of the most tense and dynamic episodes in all of Korra and Avatar combined, and the pacing of the show immediately slows to a crawl, dedicating an entire episode to a love square between Asami, Mako, Korra, and Bolin. It undermines the tension of the previous episode and completely disregards any impression of Korra living in fear. But that's not the only pacing issue. Last episode, it's made clear to the viewer that Korra joining Tarlock's task force is eating into the time she would otherwise spend practicing for the pro bending tournament. This episode starts by establishing that Korra has basically left Tarlock's task force and has been back-to-back practicing for days, maybe weeks. Why? It's like there was an arc planned here, but they just skipped it. There was a clear conflict. Korra can't be committed to pro bending and the task force, but between episode the conflict is resolved and she's obviously chosen pro bending, which completely contradicts the path she was on last episode. I've seen people call this a filler episode, and I wish that were the case. Filler typically doesn't drag down the entire show, but this episode actively contradicts and undermines the episodes surrounding it. Problem 2, the episode itself. The whole episode revolves around Korra wanting to fuck Mako, but Mako's kind of taken. But meanwhile, Bolin wants to smash Korra, and Mako knows this. Maybe this played into Mako rejecting Korra, maybe it didn't. Point is, Mako's aware of Bolin's intentions by the time he rejects Korra. After that rejection, Bolin swoops in for that sweet, sweet rebound. Korra's reluctant, but after another high-level speech check, he convinces her that they'd just be having fun. And have fun they do. We get a brief montage of their outings and are introduced to a minor antagonist, Tano, who leads the current reigning pro-bending champions. Now, after seemingly a good while of this, Mako is salty and confronts Korra. It's implied that Mako thinks Korra is just using Bolin as a tool for revenge, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Mako has no reason by this point to think Korra would be that spiteful. But protecting Bolin has been the soul of his character since his introduction, so I'm willing to forgive his irrationality as it's consistent with what we currently know about his character. Not that that excuse lasts more than 5 seconds. After barely winning a match thanks to Bolin, with Mako and Korra spending more time fighting each other than their opponents, Mako confronts Korra again, almost to apologize and say that he actually does like her, but it's a confusing time for him and oh my god, he's trying to rebound Korra from his own brother. And it fucking works! Korra kisses him.
You slut!
He kisses her back.
You slut!
And Bolin sees, because of course Bolin sees, and he's understandably crushed. Mako tries to salvage the situation, starting to realize just how much he fucked up, but the damage is done and Bolin runs off crying. This leads to more arguing between Mako and Korra, and after some implied time has passed, Mako finds Bolin a mess in a noodle shop just before their next match. And the episode seems to be treating the blatant betrayal Bolin has been hit with as comedy? But who cares, the entire conflict is resolved with a pep talk and mutual apology between the brothers, blaming the whole situation on girls are complicated. Which, yeah, okay, I can buy that. Neither Mako nor Bolin are portrayed as particularly mature and experienced with dating. It makes sense for them to default to brotherly camaraderie and prioritize each other. But that doesn't change how unsatisfying it is after a whole episode of this bullshit love triangle. The episode should end in an all-out brawl in the gym. Bolin, my guy, your ass got betrayed. Show a little backbone and throw some rocks. But no, instead, Korra also apologizes, and the plot and characters, for the most part, remain unaffected by the whole thing. Except for Asami, ironically enough, the character that was only in the background is the most affected by this entire episode. What a mess.
I'm trying to reconstruct the air and all that brings.
So yeah, that episode was kind of a mess, but I can confidently say that it is the exception and not the rule, because we get right back into the good stuff in episode 6, starting with a training session that's interrupted by one of Amon's speeches on the radio, calling on the city council to cancel the pro-bending finals. Korra rejects this threat and marches to City Hall to tell the council, hey, don't do that. But the council's already made their decision. Surprisingly, Tarlock is all for canceling the game, claiming that while he still plans to fight Amon, he won't risk civilian lives for the sake of a game. The council's mind is made up until Sam Raimi himself barges in, surprising everyone. If only. It's not Sam Raimi, but instead it's Chief Beifong, who calls out the cowardice in such a response, telling the council to show some backbone. Tenzin strongly objects, further arguing that this antagonistic approach would risk increasing tensions between benders and non-benders. But with the chief of police's entrance, Tarlock is intrigued and asks what she would suggest. Lin offers to provide extra security for the event, and when Tarlock presses her, claims she'll take full responsibility for the safety of the spectators. In response, Tarlock changes his vote and sways the other representatives to do the same, except for Tenzin, who remains against the whole thing. It's refreshing to see the return of Tarlock the politician. It shouldn't be, he's only been gone for an episode, but god, what a long episode it was. Once the match begins, it becomes apparent that the refs have been paid off in favor of the defending champions, the Wolfbats. Korra and her friends lose, and it's made clear that Amon was the one who paid off the refs, so he could publicly defeat the less popular and sympathetic of the competing teams. The arena is invaded and Beifong's officers are taken down. Amon brings down the Wolfbats with ease and takes their bending. He then gives a speech in the center of the arena, effectively declaring war on the city. We're then treated to a beautifully animated fight scene, and Korra pursues Amon with the help of Beifong. But they fail and he gets away, along with all of his forces. This whole episode is tightly packed with complex dialogue, interesting plot threads, and beautiful fight choreography and animation to back it up. It's everything you'd want in Avatar, and it restored my hope in defending this season.
And oxidation is the compromise you own.
We get an immediate follow-up to Tarlock's scheming in the introduction. Rather than the pro-bending narrator recapping the last episode, we're treated to Tarlock framing the whole thing as Chief Beifong failing at her job, pushing for new police leadership. Despite this, Lin carries on and raids Cabbage Corp, Hiroshi Sato's biggest competitor, and finds Equalist-related evidence in one of their warehouses. Meanwhile, the retired Fire Ferrets are visiting/staying with Asami, when Korra starts to suspect that Hiroshi is the one working with the Equalists, and framed Cabbage Corp. A new investigation opens up, but nothing is found, and it seems Hiroshi is innocent. Which is more than a little awkward for Korra, but she's given a tip from one of Hiroshi's workers. He claims to have joined the Equalists out of genuine hope that Amon could help him and other non-benders, but that he wants no part of any war. It's interesting to see the other side of Amon's followers, non-benders that are dissatisfied with the status quo but want nothing to do with the extremism Amon provides. This Equalist defector tells Korra, Beifong, and Tenzin that Hiroshi has a secret factory, hidden under his own home, and that he's building a new weapon for the Equalists. So Beifong orders a raid on the entire mansion, and surprise surprise, there's an underground tunnel leading to said factory. Asami is shocked by this, along with Mako and Bolin. They're ordered to stay behind while the police move in. This episode has been strong so far, but it starts to falter when it's revealed that the defector was actually completely loyal to Amon and was just setting them up to walk right into a trap. What was an interesting plot point about the loyalty of Amon's followers has now made the whole conflict little more than us versus them because every Equalist is evil. Hiroshi confronts Korra and explains that he had intended to trap them here so he could capture and deliver them all to Amon. And this is where the episode really starts to go off the rails, because why the fuck would you do that? Look, Hiroshi, my man, I know this may come as a surprise to you, but your story checked out. You could have been a free man. You could have continued being a double agent, feeding them on intel and maybe set them up in a way that didn't implicate you. You didn't need to expose yourself. And what's worse, this could have still worked if instead of Hiroshi claiming to have set the whole thing up himself, there's a throwaway line about how he already suspected he had a traitor and weeded him out. Maybe he offhandedly mentions handing the snitch over to Amon personally. That would have preserved what makes the traitor interesting and justified the trap. But it's not all bad. The fight scene following Hiroshi's reveal is great. And it's at least semi-satisfying when Asami inevitably comes down, sees her father, is offered a taser glove, and actually doesn't cross over to the dark side, instead opting to just zap the bitch. But we'll get back to that later. The main cast narrowly escape, but a whole squad of Beifong's officers have been captured and the chief herself is injured. So she resolves to hand in her resignation, planning to work outside of the law to get them back. Exactly as Tarlock hoped for from the beginning of the episode. Overall, the episode works. The love triangle isn't as oppressive as last time, and the problem with the traitor I mentioned isn't that noticeable on your first watch through. It's not bad, but it could have been much, much better.
But this is beginning to feel like the dog wants a bone.
I both love and hate this episode. If you've made it this far, you've probably gathered that Tarlock is among my favorite characters of this season. He's selfish and manipulative, but you get a sense that he genuinely wants what's best for the city. He's an anti-hero at heart. His morals are questionable, but he's on the side of our protagonists. Of course, with the way he's written, it's almost guaranteed that he'll eventually make the switch from anti-hero to full-on antagonist. And God knows there's nothing wrong with changing the role of a character in your story. Having a character switch from hero to villain, or villain to hero, or anti-hero to... My point is, there's nothing wrong with switching a character's role in the middle of your story, but there needs to be a specific event or set of events that explain and justify such a dramatic shift within that story. For Zuko, it was confronting his father. For Vegeta, it was seeking help from former enemies to stop Frieza. For Walter White, it was poisoning a child. The problem with this episode is that Tarlock finally makes his transformation from anti-hero to full-fledged villain. And it happens at the beginning, the very first time we see him this episode. The story starts with Beifong's replacement, Saikon, being inducted as the new chief of police, and he states that he'll report directly to Tarlock on any matters involving the Equalists. Korra's immediate reaction is one of hostility towards Tarlock. After Saikon's speech, Tarlock doesn't inquire about, but assumes Korra will be rejoining his task force, which is just a tad bit out of character, but aight. And Korra dismisses him, claiming she has no interest in his vanity project. Why the fuck is Korra now against Tarlock and his task force? Her last interaction with him was a pleasant one. She thanked him for keeping the pro-bending arena open. That's the last time these two characters interacted, and now their relationship is adversarial? So Tarlock hits her ego with that tried and true "you still can't airbend, bitch," and she feels down. But a quick pep talk fixes that right up, and she resolves to patrol the city with her friends as the new Team Avatar. They manage to stop and capture some Equalist chi blockers before Tarlock can, and he's just a bit miffed. Tarlock responds by passing a law making it illegal to support or associate with the Equalists in any way, as well as enforcing a curfew for non-benders. This episode, at its core, revolves around Tarlock's downward spiral into authoritarian extremism. And despite how negative I've been, that theme works really well here. Tarlock, like Amon, steals every scene he's in. And this theme continues when Korra confronts him about his new methods at a gathering of protesters. In response, he arrests her friends and rounds up every non-bender in the area. Tenzin tries to get Korra's friends released, but is unsuccessful. He tells Korra to be patient and that he'll bring it up with Tarlock in the morning, but Korra decides to confront Tarlock herself, and the following scene is just so good. Certainly a worthy climax to the episode. Korra argues that Tarlock's extremism is only making Amon stronger by validating his message. But Tarlock makes one last appeal to Korra, telling her that they're the same, both willing to use their power to get what they want. He then offers her a deal. He releases her friends if she joins his task force. Finally, we see a glimpse of the Tarlock we were introduced to, a manipulator, a negotiator. But this time, Korra stands her ground and outright refuses Tarlock's offer, telling him that he's just as bad as Amon. In response, Tarlock treats us to yet another glorious fight scene. He holds the upper hand for the most part, but Korra's use of the environment removes his source of water and corners him. But instead of negotiating with the new context of having Tarlock cornered, Korra goes in for the kill, forcing him to reveal that he is a bloodbender. Korra is shocked by this, but even more so by the fact that it's not a full moon. Tarlock neglects to explain himself and skips straight to kidnapping Korra, removing her from the equation. The episode ends with him driving her out of the city. Now, before we move on to the next episode, let's imagine an alternate version of the one we just went through. Korra rejoins Tarlock's task force, enthusiastic about helping the city now that she no longer has a responsibility to her pro-bending team. We get a few more raids on the Equalists, but Tarlock is frustrated with his lack of progress toward capturing Amon. So he starts interrogating and even torturing the chi blockers they've already arrested, causing Korra to doubt his character. When this fails, he resolves to stop Amon's influence from spreading any further, passing the law that we see in this episode. Korra, being on his task force, tries to talk him out of it, but his decision is made. We arrive at the same gathering of protesters, but this time Korra is with Tarlock. But that doesn't mean her friends are out of the story. They follow the same path, and still end up at this rally on the side of the protesters. Tarlock still arrests Asami, followed by Mako and Bolin, and this is the last straw for Korra. She threatens Tarlock, demanding that he let everyone go, but Tarlock yet again convinces her, saying that the Avatar and a councilman fighting in the streets only helps Amon. So she swallows her pride and leaves. It's not over, however. She still confronts Tarlock later that night, telling him that if he doesn't stop, she'll use her status as the Avatar to do everything in her power to damage his reputation. In response, Tarlock tries to arrest her, and the fight plays out exactly as it did in the episode. Now there's a clear chain of events that lead to Tarlock's transformation into a villain. Just so we're clear, I don't mind Tarlock being a villain. He's still an amazing character. I'd say he rivals Azula from Avatar. But being a great character isn't enough. You need good character interactions within the greater story, and you need that story to complement those interactions. Now, I'm not saying I could make a better Legend of Korra. All I did here was clean up a few messy plot points, which is a lot easier than writing a story from scratch. The reason I constructed this alternative story in the first place wasn't to show off any sort of writing prowess, no. I did it because this is the direction the story was already going. This episode is another example of the show having something really good, but going back on it at the last minute for seemingly no reason, and having an inferior version of what could have been as a result. They had a plotline where Korra was on Tarlock's task force that worked really well, but then they cut it short and made Korra hate Tarlock for no reason. And I'd like to reiterate, overall, I really like this episode. It just could have been so much better, and that sucks.
What are you? I am the solution.
So Tarlock is now a fully fledged bad guy. Great, fine, whatever. Ignoring the pacing issues of the previous episode, episode 9 starts off strong with Tarlock framing the Equalists for Korra's kidnapping. This leads a recovering Beifong to free Mako, Bolin, and Asami, and recruit Tenzin to hunt for Korra by searching/raiding an Equalist base underground. Mako takes Korra's kidnapping especially hard, and practically leads the team through a maze of tunnels, leading Asami to get just a tad suspicious that maybe, just maybe, he's trying to smash. All kidding aside, the love triangle has progressed from being intolerable to tolerable to something I actually enjoy watching. The characters react believably to the situation they're confronted with, and it's interesting to see Mako take an active role in the story. Speaking of which, Mako interrogates a near-unconscious Equalist only to learn that they have no idea where Korra is, and that Tarlock lied about their involvement. Tenzin believes this immediately, which is kinda weird considering this is coming from a terrorist, but aight, and they go to confront Tarlock. A testimony from a conveniently placed secretary seals the deal and Tarlock bloodbends everyone unconscious. Meanwhile, Korra has been meditating on her visions, finally getting the hang of the spiritual side of being the Avatar, and learns of Tarlock's father, Yakone, a bloodbending crime boss from Aang's era. Once she's finished that flashback story, Tarlock returns, planning to escape, keeping her as a hostage. But remember how he basically scapegoated the Equalists for his crime? Turns out, Amon didn't like that very much, and shows up at his cabin with a squad of chi blockers and Equalist Nightwing. Tarlock tries to bloodbend them, but finds that Amon is immune. He then recoils in terror as Amon takes his bending. Nightwing tries to knock Korra out, but she outsmarts him and finally escapes, coming face to face with Amon. She attacks with a flurry of ice, but misses every shot, hinting at his true nature. As Amon charges forward, Korra books it down a hill, narrowly escaping but getting knocked out. But hey, Naga tracked her down. Remember that? Remember how Naga can track? Naga did something. Naga actually has a purpose now. She's no longer just a blatant plot device. Unlike some people. The season finale is a three-parter, and it starts very strong. We get a brief break from the action to enjoy our main cast resting and debriefing over Korra's kidnapping. When Tenzin hears of Amon attacking Tarlock, he concludes that he must be approaching his endgame, so he asks Beifong to watch over his family while he meets with the council. In a satisfying and really touching resolution to the less talked about love triangle, Lin offers her full assistance in protecting Tenzin's family. I mean, hey, it's not like she has a job to do anymore. However, this breather is short-lived, and on his way to the meeting, Tenzin is attacked by Equalists. But because airbending is OP, he makes quick work of them, only to find that he's the only council member that wasn't captured. Afterwards, we're shown the police headquarters, where Saikon is desperately trying to maintain control of the city, slowly realizing that the entire police force is basically crippled by now. Tenzin shows up in time to hear this news and decides to send a wire to the general of the United Forces. Wait, Republic City has a military? Who's paying for it? It ain't the Earth Kingdom. Republic City is independent of them. Who are they guarding? How much territory does Republic City control? These are important questions, guys! So Tenzin's wire is sent, and reinforcements are on the way. Just in time, too. The entire headquarters is filling with gas. But, because airbending is OP, Tenzin gets everyone out safely, only to be ambushed outside by Hiroshi's mecha tanks. Tenzin puts up a good fight, but is brought down, forced to watch as the city he's sworn to protect falls around him, and the officers serving under him are taken to Amon. It's not all doom and gloom, however, as Team Avatar shows up just in time to save him, and only him. They defeat the tanks, but are forced to fall back to Tenzin's island, which is already under attack. Meanwhile, Beifong struggles with defending the island, until Tenzin's children of all people show up and blast the whole squad of chi blockers away. Because airbending is OP. The episode ends with Tenzin grabbing his family and running, and Beifong sacrificing herself to buy the time they need to escape. She's taken to Amon, and loses her bending. This episode is everything you'd want in a start to a finale. The stakes are high, the moving pieces build up and collide in a way that's both satisfying and makes sense within the story, and we even get some touching character interactions and heroic sacrifices. For all its faults, The Legend of Korra at least has its finale under control. But we've still got 2 episodes to get through, but before that, thank you for making it this far. This video has been exhausting to make, and I can only hope it's worth it to you, dear viewer. Now let's see what the rest of this finale has to offer. The second part starts with Hiroshi holding a rally in the now Equalist-controlled Republic City. Bending is illegal, and Amon is running the show. Korra and Mako watch from afar and head back to their hideout, which is overseen by that nice homeless man from episode 1. How wholesome. Now the whole squad prepares for the United Forces to arrive. But when they do, Hiroshi personally Pearl Harbors the entire fleet. It's a hard-fought battle, but General Iroh, the second, I think, barely survives thanks to Korra. The entire battle is beautifully animated and well choreographed, but you all already knew that. Once rescued, Iroh reveals that there's a second fleet of ships on the way, led by Tenzin's brother, Commander Bumi, and sends them a warning so they don't walk into the same trap. But the team still needs to ground Hiroshi's bombers if that second wave is going to be of any help. So while most of the gang prepare to attack Hiroshi's airfield, Mako and Korra decide to ambush Amon themselves. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. It kind of undermines the whole point of waiting for reinforcements. But Korra's impulsive, and Mako by this point would follow her into another 100-year war, so I'm willing to forgive the flawed logic since it makes sense within the scenario they've set up. They break back into Tenzin's home island, waiting for Amon to return to ambush him, but instead find Tarlock, imprisoned and without his bending. He then reveals that Amon is his brother and the firstborn son of Yakone. Tarlock goes on to explain him and Amon's upbringing, leading us into another flashback story, showing us Yakone raising them into bloodbending weapons after Avatar Aang removed his own bending. Eventually, Amon, or Noatak by birth, ran away after bloodbending his father, and later grew to resent the very concept of bending, and used his talents to develop a means to permanently block one's ability to bend the elements. Tarlock, meanwhile, grew up wanting to surpass his father, and be the hero Republic City needed, rather than the villain it deserved. Of course, we all know how that turned out, but for what it's worth, Tarlock apologizes to Korra and asks her to defeat Amon using the knowledge he's given her. She hatches a plan to expose Amon's true nature at an upcoming rally, in order to undermine his revolution. She tries to free Tarlock, but he explains that if Amon knew someone spoke with him, he'd be prepared for Korra's plan. So he opts to stay while they leave to confront his brother. Now, I've heard the argument that Amon being a bender makes his anti-bending conclusion nonsensical within the story, and okay, so your father is an abusive dick, and the only reason you're able to fight back and protect yourself is because the Avatar removed his bending. Oh yeah, and also, before he was the abusive dick you know today, he used his bending to be a crime boss. But because you're also a bender, it's impossible for you to resent bending because of this? I don't know about that one, Chief. Overall, this episode, including the flashback in my humble opinion, is a really strong follow-up to the previous one, and only makes me even more excited for the finale.
Your music's bad and you should feel bad.
So we start with something that can't not be amazing, a raid on Hiroshi's airfield, with an injured general, a brawling street rat, and a vengeful daughter. Now, for context, Asami's character arc for the past 3 episodes has been being salty at Mako for kissing Korra,
You slut!
and having a raging hate boner for her dad. Now, it's good that Asami has a goal and purpose in the story. Her arc revolves around defeating one of the main antagonists, and this results in her being an active character with purpose. Unlike some people. However, by this point, her and Mako have basically broken up, and she's only here to fight her dad. Her pairing up with Bolin in the finale is kinda weird. The only time they had a real meaningful interaction was when she basically interrogated him until he spilled the beans about Mako and Korra kissing. So having them be the new dream team when taking down Hiroshi is both jarring, but also expected just by process of elimination. Bolin's the only main character she isn't salty at right now, so of course he's the one she pairs up with for the final battle. Apparently Asami was originally written to be a villain, and it shows. She gets a lot better in the next season when the writers actually had time to flesh out her character and motivations, but right now she's kinda just there. Again, it's not all bad. I'm not saying she's a plot device or anything. She has an arc, and it can be pretty satisfying at times. It's just unfortunate that she's been so sidelined despite all the screen time she's gotten. You know what they could have done with that screen time? More Tarlock. But in all seriousness, the attack on the airfield is really bad. So they show up and find some fence posts, but no fence. And being the geniuses they are, they walk right through, but get electrocuted and captured. Instant game over, right? Well, no, they were captured so Asami and Hiroshi can have one last casual talk before they inevitably mech fight. And after Hiroshi leaves, Naga shows up and tears down the bars of their cell. Now, Bolin told Naga and Pabu to wait on the nearby hill for them, so they must have gone in after everyone was captured, probably while they were unconscious. So tell me, why weren't they electrocuted? Did Hiroshi just decide, nah, these guys are probably it, no reinforcements coming, you can turn those off. Do you have any idea how expensive that electricity is? We then get Iroh hijacking and taking down the planes as they're taking off, Asami mech fighting her dad, and Bolin backing her up while also fighting the resident Equalists. Once the actual battle begins, it's great. The animation and choreography is still great. You just wish they led with this and skipped the bullshit capture that didn't mean anything. Meanwhile, Korra attends Amon's rally and interrupts the man mid-speech.
Now that was rude.
She exposes him, telling the tale of how he's a bloodbender and the son of Yakone. Now, this is where another one of those little things come into play. I don't mind Amon's backstory. I like Noatak as a character, but Amon's sob story about a firebender killing his family and scarring him was a really interesting parallel to Mako's origin story. It showed the difference between a bending orphan and a non-bending orphan. Mako landed on his feet, and Amon grew to despise benders and formed a revolution solution. That's some cool shit, but now that whole concept is undermined. But speaking of Amon's tragic fake backstory, man takes off his mask to reveal a scar he applied to himself with makeup. Homie came prepared. So Korra's exposure piece falls flat and she and Mako are about to retreat. And this is where it gets worse. Turns out Amon captured Tenzin and his family. How, you ask? I have no idea, neither does Korra, and Amon doesn't seem interested in explaining. Everything I said about airbending being OP, throw that out the window. All the airbenders were captured off screen. Except, wait, forget what I said, airbending is still OP because Amon can't redirect what he can't see, so once Korra frees him, Tenzin sends Amon flying and they escape down a hall. If Tenzin can reliably send Amon flying, how the fuck did he capture them? But now that his secret's out, Amon decides, fuck it, and bloodbends Korra out of hiding and takes her bending, keeping Mako subdued. The following scene is actually really good, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. See, Korra didn't just accuse Amon of being Yakone's son, she pointed out him being Tarlock's brother, and that got ya boy the lieutenant thinking, you know, Amon did take special care to prioritize Tarlock over capturing the Avatar, maybe there is something there. So he followed Amon down the hall and witnessed his bloodbending firsthand. He feels understandably betrayed and smashes his mask, charging in for an attack. Amon responds by fucking killing him. Unfortunately, this badassery may as well be the last breath of the greatness that is Amon, because Korra, when Mako is about to lose his bending, randomly airbends and sends Amon flying. And this is where the story really starts breaking down, because Amon responds by bloodbending her again. But because the writers wrote themselves into a corner with how overpowered Amon truly is, Korra just rejects the bloodbending and kicks the man through a window. The worst part is that there was an obvious alternative to this. Have Korra enter the Avatar state, preferably before Amon takes her bending. We've already seen the Avatar state successfully resist and even nullify the effects of bloodbending. Aang did it when fighting Yakone. It not only would have been a cool parallel between Korra and Aang, and therefore great fan service to have her do the same thing, it also would have made sense in the world you fucking built. Missed opportunities aside, Amon gets away after being unmasked as a fraud. He frees Tarlock and begs him to run away with him, saying he's the only family he has left. Tarlock agrees, and they ride off into the sunset. But when Tarlock realizes his brother will just start his revolution up elsewhere, he takes a shock glove Amon chose to keep, and blows their speedboat to Kingdom Come, killing them both. The scene is haunting, and it's a fitting end for someone who wanted to be the city's savior. In the end, he got to be. God, what a scene. It almost makes you forget about, oh my god, why is Aang here? Wait, why is Aang giving Korra her bending back? How is Aang giving Korra her bending back? If Amon uses bloodbending to remove bending, isn't it a physical block? Why is Avatar's spiritual mumbo-jumbo the solution? This all could have been avoided if Korra just defeated Amon with the Avatar state. You guys had one job! You literally set up that exact weakness in a flashback. Why didn't you follow through? Now, this isn't unique to Korra, despite what some diehard fans would have you believe. The exact same problem is apparent in The Last Airbender. They set up a great conflict. Can Aang kill the Fire Lord, and can he do it without the power of the Avatar state? But then they got cold feet and made both those questions irrelevant with a Deus Ex Machina. 2 Deus Ex Machinas, actually. These guys are great at writing characters and telling stories, but they're not the best at finishing those stories. They have some very clear trouble sticking the landing, and that's clear in both Avatar and Korra. And that's Season 1. Now, I'd love to jump straight into Season 2, but I am very tired. I've also got some unfinished business elsewhere. Until then, in conclusion, these videos aren't great, but ER is especially dumb. Fun fact, this video was originally going to exclusively be a response to his videos, but that script just boiled down to him saying something about the show and me pointing out why it's objectively false. Like, you know how Renegade Cut would say something happened in an episode of Rick and Morty and I would tirelessly look through that episode and not find it? That's ER's videos. That's all of ER's videos. Imagine an hour-long video that's just me responding to that. That's what this video was originally going to be, and I think we're better off here. Good night, everybody!